Hello there, my dear friend. Welcome to this cozy corner of YouTube where we can wind down together and take a gentle stroll through some of the most fascinating corners of history. If you've had a long day, or if you're looking for something calming to listen to as you drift off to sleep, you're in exactly the right place. Before we begin tonight's story, I'd love to know where are you tuning in from? And what time of day is it for you right now? Go ahead and leave me a comment. I love seeing how far and wide this little storytelling community reaches. And if you enjoy these quiet journeys into the past, filled with rich history and soothing storytelling, please consider subscribing. It means the world and helps us bring more of these calming episodes your way. Now, let's settle in. Maybe you've got a soft blanket or a warm cup of tea nearby. Close your eyes if you like. Let's take a deep breath. Tonight, we're traveling back through the centuries to Imperial China to explore the complicated and often heartbreaking lives of the emperor's concubines. These women were handpicked for their beauty and the hope that they would bear royal heirs. From the outside, it may have looked like a life of luxury, ornate silks, glittering jewels, palaces beyond imagining. But behind those gilded walls lay a very different reality. As we peek behind the red screens and walk quietly in their embroidered slippers, you'll see, life in the imperial harem was far from a fairy tale. But first, let's set the scene. Picture the sprawling grounds of the Forbidden City in Beijing. Massive vermilion walls, sweeping tiled roofs, courtyards alive with flowers and fish ponds, vast ceremonial halls with golden columns and intricate carvings. This was the beating heart of an empire that rolled over millions. A place of staggering wealth and unimaginable grandeur. But if you zoom in closer, beyond the grand halls and bustling officials, you'll find quieter corners, secluded courtyards, and intimate chambers where thousands of women spent their days serving one man, the Son of Heaven, the Emperor. Inside these high red walls, the usual order of Chinese society didn't quite apply. In the outside world, women had very little power. But here, the emperor's mother, the empress, and his highest-ranking consorts wielded influence that would be unthinkable beyond the palace. Still, even the most favored concubine could never forget one brutal truth: her status depended entirely on the whims of men. She had been given to the palace by her father, her brothers, or her family. The emperor could elevate her with a single glance or ruin her with a wave of his hand. She existed in a cage of gold, for life devoted to pleasing one man and producing heirs for the dynasty. Now, how did the system come to be? Throughout China's long history, emperors took multiple consorts as a practical way to ensure a steady supply of male heirs to continue their bloodline. But these women weren't just baby makers. They were political pawns, status symbols, and tools for their families to climb the social ladder. From the mighty Tang dynasty to the final Qing dynasty, having a daughter selected as an imperial concubine was the dream of many Chinese families. The highest honor imaginable. Of course, the reality was often cruel. Behind the silkscreens and jade hairpins lay a world of fierce competition, precarious power, and shattered dreams. Many of these women were barely more than girls when they were swept into the palace. They left behind everything they knew: family, friends, freedom, for a life of strict rules and constant uncertainty. For a concubine, the only real path to influence was to win the emperor's favor and bear his son. But in the treacherous waters of palace politics, today's favorite could become tomorrow's forgotten exile. So now let's draw back the embroidered curtain and tiptoe down the hushed palace corridors. There are so many secrets to uncover. Stories of rivalry, doomed romance, devastating loss, and fleeting triumphs. These were women who schemed and struggled to survive in a world they didn't choose. As we explore what it was really like to live behind those red walls, I invite you to sink deeper into relaxation. Let my voice guide you gently towards sleep as these stories from long ago wash over you like a quiet river. Let's begin. Imagine you are a teenage girl from a small village. You spend your days running through fields with your siblings and learning embroidery from your mother. Life is simple but full of love and familiar rhythms. But then one day, everything changes. Your delicate beauty and graceful bearing have caught the eye of an imperial scout, always on the lookout for girls who might become new concubines for the emperor. Without warning, you are taken from your home to begin a long journey to the Forbidden City. As you say tearful goodbyes to your family, your heart is a swirl of emotions: excitement, fear, and a deep, aching sorrow. You are leaving everything behind. Ahead lies a palace you've only heard about in whispers, a place of myth and legend where thousands of women live their lives in service to the dragon throne. As your palanquin passes through the towering gates, your breath catches. Sweeping tiled roofs, gilded statues, shimmering pavilions. A world pulsing with color and life. But as you are led into the women's quarters, reality begins to settle in. Here, you are no longer a daughter, a sister, or a friend. You are one of many concubines. A single pawn in a vast, glittering game. You must learn the complex hierarchies and protocols of the palace. How to dress. How to speak in the presence of superiors. The precise way to serve tea to the Empress Dowager. Every action is watched. One small mistake could bring humiliation or harsh punishment. Far from the warmth and freedom of your old life, you find yourself in a regimented, almost monastic existence. Days dictated by imperial rituals and endless duties. You are a bird in a golden cage. Your value is tied to your beauty, your ability to bear children, and your skill in pleasing the emperor. And yet, as you lie in your silk-draped bed at night, listening to the mournful sound of a distant flute, a tiny flame of hope still flickers. Perhaps, just perhaps, the emperor will call you to his chambers. Perhaps you will win his affection. But as we'll see, winning the dragon's heart is a dangerous game. It could lift you to dazzling heights or cast you into ruin. Life in the imperial harem was often nasty, brutish, and short. True power and security were always just out of reach. As we continue, we'll meet concubines who schemed and struggled, some who rose, some who fell, all hoping to survive this glittering, treacherous world. For now, though, let us leave our young heroine at the beginning of her journey. Let her find her way in the strange land of roles and rituals, taking her first tentative steps into a life of uncertainty and danger. Her story is just beginning, and there are so many more to tell. For now, my dear listener, I invite you to relax a little deeper. Let your breath slow. Let your body grow heavy. There's no need to remember every name or detail. Let the story wash over you like a gentle stream. In our next chapter, we'll explore the vicious palace politics that ensnared so many concubines, where a single word or a well-placed gift could make or break a woman's fate. But that is a story for another time. For now, drift peacefully and may your sleep be deep and sweet. Good night. Welcome back, my friend. If you're still with me tonight, I invite you to settle in even deeper. Maybe dim the lights a bit more. Let's pick up where we left off, with our young heroine stepping into her new life inside the Forbidden City. The very first thing she would have noticed? How utterly foreign the place looked, smelled, and sounded compared to anywhere she had ever been before. As she crossed through those towering red gates, a whole new world unfolded in front of her. Grand tile roofs stretched toward the sky. Massive ceremonial halls gleamed in the sunlight. Exquisitely landscaped gardens spilled over with peonies, lotuses, and plum blossoms. And the air itself, thick with the heady scent of incense, mingled with the faint perfume of polished woods and the subtle fragrances of thousands of meticulously groomed women. The hustle and bustle of Beijing outside the walls seemed to vanish. Inside the Forbidden City, life moved to its own rhythms. The chatter of the city faded into the soft chirping of caged birds, the murmured orders of eunuchs, and the faint rustle of long embroidered silk robes brushing across polished stone floors. For a girl from a small village, the sheer size and magnificence of the palace would have been staggering. It's estimated that during the Ming Dynasty, the palace housed up to 10,000 eunuchs and maids, along with hundreds of wives and consorts, all serving the Son of Heaven and his vast imperial household. Just the harem quarters alone, known as the Six Palaces, contained hundreds of buildings and over 9,000 rooms. But after the initial wonder wore off, apprehension and anxiety would quickly take hold, because this was now her entire world. From the moment she stepped through those red gates, her old life, her name, her family, her identity, was left behind. She would live out her days in seclusion, her every movement watched, her sole purpose now to serve the emperor and, if fate allowed, to bear his children. Her first order of business? Learning the countless rules and protocols that governed every single aspect of palace life. Each rank of consort had its own privileges, titles, and living arrangements, and everything from how to walk, speak, and bow, to what colors of clothing were allowed, was dictated by a dizzying web of regulations. Even for a low-ranking concubine, mastering this intricate etiquette was essential. A single mistake, an incorrect form of address, a clumsy bow, could mean a harsh public scolding, or worse. Eunuchs and senior palace women drilled the newcomers daily. How to greet superiors, how to pour tea in exactly the right way, how to walk gracefully without raising one's eyes improperly. And all the while, the girls were completely cut off from their families and their old lives. Contact with the outside world was forbidden. The emperor's women were not to be seen or touched by any other man, not even their own brothers or fathers. By the later Qing dynasty, the harem functioned as a walled city within the Forbidden City, its own little universe, sealed off by layers of watchful eunuchs and strict protocol. Venturing beyond the women's quarters required elaborate approvals, and even then, eunuchs would clear entire corridors to ensure no men laid eyes on the emperor's women. The only glimpse of the outside world came once a year, when select concubines were allowed to accompany the emperor to a temple ceremony. But even then, they traveled hidden behind curtained palanquins. For most, it was an inescapable life sentence. Few emperors allowed their consorts to leave the palace, even in old age. They were considered imperial property, expected to serve and die within the palace walls. One Qing emperor bluntly put it, "They belong to the palace and they should die in the palace." The emotional cost of this severing of family ties was immense. Take the story of Imperial concubine Li, who entered the Forbidden City at age 13 in the early 1800s. Li was the daughter of a Han Chinese general. Despite her family's military standing, she was not spared the loneliness and fear that plagued so many new concubines. In her memoir, Yehanala's Captivity, Li described the Forbidden City as a large prison. She wrote of her despair upon realizing she might never see her parents or siblings again. Her brother, a powerful general, once petitioned the emperor to allow— Welcome back, dear listener. If your eyes are getting heavier, don't worry, you can simply listen and drift. There's no need to remember every name or event. Just let the stories wash over you like a gentle stream through history. When we left off, we saw how a concubine's position in the palace was never truly secure, even for the most favored consorts. Now we turn to one of the most dangerous yet potentially rewarding roles a concubine could hold, that of a mother. In the imperial palace, motherhood was everything. A concubine's value, her entire future, depended on her ability to produce children, especially sons. And yet, becoming pregnant was no simple matter. Thousands of beautiful women lived inside the harem, and the emperor could summon whomever he wished, whenever he wished. Most concubines were called to his bed only once or twice in their entire lives, if at all. For those few who did catch his attention, the opportunity to conceive was still an unpredictable gamble. Fertility treatments, as we know them today, didn't exist. Ancient remedies were based on superstition, not science. And even if a woman did become pregnant, her trials were only beginning. Childbirth in imperial China was fraught with danger. Without modern medicine or hygiene, maternal mortality rates were devastatingly high. Hemorrhages, infections, and obstructed labors were common and often fatal. Records from the palace are filled with heartbreaking stories of mothers and babies lost during delivery. One such tragic tale belongs to Consort Duan, a low-ranking concubine of the Ming Yongle Emperor in the early 1400s. Consort Duan was just a girl of 15 when she was chosen for the Forbidden City, plucked from a rural village in distant Xinjiang. She was young, uneducated, and frightened, but critically, she was healthy and fertile. Within her first year in the palace, Consort Duan became pregnant, a rare stroke of fortune. The chance to bear the emperor's child promised a potential rise in rank, security, and influence. But her young body was unprepared for the strain. 6 months into her pregnancy, she went into premature labor. The tiny infant, a girl, survived only a few hours. Duan herself was left with severe complications. Infection set in, and the emperor's doctors, bound by the limited knowledge of their time, were unable to stop her decline. Just shy of her 17th birthday, Consort Duan died of sepsis. She was one of countless palace women lost to the brutal expectations of the harem's demand for heirs. It was a grim reality. The average life expectancy of an imperial concubine was just 25 years. Multiple pregnancies often meant multiple brushes with death. And remember, sons were the goal. In an age before ultrasounds, the sex of a child remained a mystery until birth. A daughter brought little elevation in status. Only a healthy son could secure a concubine's place and ensure her long-term survival. One of the rare success stories was that of Consort Xiaozhuan, a 17th-century concubine of the Qing Tianqi emperor. Born into a respected military family, Xiaozhuan was beautiful, lively, and most importantly, fertile. After an early stillbirth, she gave birth to a healthy son in 1592. The emperor was overjoyed and elevated Xiaozhuan to the rank of consort, granting her wealth and protection. When the emperor died unexpectedly, Xiaozhuan's 2-year-old son was named the new Chongzhen emperor. As the mother of the new ruler, Xiaozhuang became Empress Dowager, the most powerful woman in the empire. Her meteoric rise shows how the birth of a single son could utterly transform a woman's fate. But for every Xiaozhuang, there were thousands of others who never reached such heights, who failed to produce sons and remained trapped at the lowest rungs of the harem hierarchy. One such example is Consort Lu, a minor concubine of the Ming Tianqi emperor in the early 1600s. Consort Lu bore two daughters, no sons. The emperor, increasingly desperate for an heir, grew frustrated. Younger, more beautiful concubines replaced Lu in his affections. She was demoted to the role of maid and eventually expelled from the palace, forced to become a Taoist nun. Even in exile, she wasn't safe. The paranoid emperor accused her of plotting against him and had her dragged back to Beijing, where she died in prison. Her story illustrates just how disposable these women were. One failed pregnancy, one aging face, one wrong political faction, and everything could be lost. Now let's return to our young heroine from part 2. Imagine her lying awake in her richly decorated quarters, the weight of expectation pressing down on her. She knows if she can produce a son, her future is secure. If not, she may spend decades in lonely obscurity. Every month, she tracks her cycle with desperate hope. When summoned to the emperor's chambers, she dresses with painstaking care, layering herself in the scents and silks he prefers. The pressure is immense. Even a single night might determine the rest of her life. But the dangers of childbearing loom large. Consider Consort Rong, a beloved concubine of the Qin Qianlong emperor. Rong became pregnant 4 times. 3 ended in miscarriage. Only her 4th pregnancy resulted in a live birth, a sickly son who died within months. Devastated, Rong fell into despair. Her beauty faded, the emperor's visits ceased. She spent her later years wandering the palace gardens alone, her hopes extinguished. This was the unspoken reality for most imperial women. They lived between hope and dread, with each pregnancy a potential pathway to either glory or ruin. And yet, despite it all, some concubines found ways to carve out meaning and identity in this stifling world. They became poets, painters, musicians. They left behind haunting verses and delicate art that whispered their inner lives to the ages. One such woman was Concubine Qi, a talented poet and musician of the Tengji Emperor's harem. Though she only met the emperor once and was never summoned again, she spent nearly 50 years within the Forbidden City composing melancholy poems about the passing seasons and her cloistered life. She died at 63, largely forgotten. But her surviving verses offer a poignant glimpse into the yearning and resilience of these palace women. As we prepare to close this chapter, consider this. For every famous empress or concubine who made it into the history books, there were thousands of others whose names we'll never know. Women who entered the palace with trembling hope, endured years of isolation, and died without a trace. Their sacrifices, their struggles, their quiet acts of endurance, these deserve to be remembered. In our next part, we'll explore the treacherous rivalries and deadly intrigue that unfolded behind the silk curtains of the imperial harem, where jealousy and ambition turned sister against sister. But for now, breathe deeply. Rest. The palace walls still stand and their secrets wait to be told. Welcome back, dear listener. Are you comfortable? Good. The night is long and our story still has many layers to reveal. So far, we've explored the glittering illusions and harsh realities of life inside the Forbidden City. We've seen how motherhood could lift a concubine to the heights of power or send her crashing into despair. Now let's step into the shadows, into the corridors where whispered words could kill and a single misstep could mean ruin. Welcome to the treacherous world of harem politics. Imagine this, thousands of women confined within the palace walls. Each one acutely aware that her future depends on the emperor's favor that is capricious, fleeting, and in terrifyingly short supply. This was a pressure cooker like no other. Friendships were rare and dangerous. Rivalries were constant. Because for every woman who rose to prominence, someone else had to fall. Even a favored concubine could see her fortunes reversed overnight if a rival whispered the right rumor into the right ear. Let's begin with one of the most infamous examples of palace intrigue, Consort Qi, a concubine of the Ming Jiajing Emperor in the 16th century. Consort Qi was not born into privilege. She came from a modest family but possessed breathtaking beauty and extraordinary cunning. After catching the emperor's eye, she rose quickly, becoming one of his most trusted companions. A Consort Qi wasn't content with mere favor. She wanted power, and there was one woman standing in her way, Empress Qin, the emperor's first wife. Consort Qi devised a ruthless plan. She bribed a palace eunuch to accuse Empress Qin of using witchcraft to harm the emperor, a crime punishable by death. The accusation worked. Empress Chen was arrested and tortured until she confessed. She was stripped of her title and imprisoned. But consort Qi wasn't finished. Fearing that the deposed empress might regain her position, Qi arranged for her to be silently strangled in her cell with a silk cord. With her rival eliminated, consort Qi persuaded the emperor to break tradition and make her the new empress. For a time she wielded immense influence, using it to enrich herself and her family. But palace resentments festered. When the emperor died, his successor stripped consort Qi of her titles and imprisoned her. She spent her final years in disgrace, another cautionary tale of how high ambition can lead to ruin. This was no isolated incident. Throughout the centuries, the harem was a battlefield where women fought for survival with whatever weapons they could muster: beauty, wit, alliances, and sometimes poison. Another chilling example comes from the Qin dynasty, where a concubine named consort Chunwei rose to become one of the Qianlong emperor's most favored companions. Born into nobility, Chunwei was known for her intelligence, musical talent, and poetry. For more than a decade, she held the emperor's affection, enjoying immense privilege. But as she aged, younger concubines entered the palace, eager to capture the emperor's heart. Rumors began to swirl, perhaps started by her rivals, that Chunwei was practicing black magic to retain the emperor's love. A palace maid came forward with accusations, likely coerced by other factions. The emperor, perhaps already growing distant from Chunwei, ordered her arrest. Under torture, she refused to confess, but it mattered little. Chunwei was stripped of her titles, imprisoned in a remote fortress, and died in lonely exile. One moment, she had been the emperor's heart's companion. The next, she was a forgotten prisoner. The lesson was clear to every woman in the palace. Favor was fickle. Safety was an illusion. Even the most exalted could be brought low by envy, rumor, and the shifting winds of palace politics. Now imagine the position of a young concubine, newly arrived in the Forbidden City. She has beauty, perhaps some charm, but little knowledge of the treacherous world she's entered. Older, more seasoned women watch her carefully. Some may extend a hand, others will look for ways to eliminate her as a threat. The young concubine must learn quickly whom to trust, whom to avoid, when to speak, and when to stay silent. A single careless comment overheard by the wrong person could trigger a chain of whispers that ends in disgrace or worse. Palace records speak of many such fatal rivalries. Consider consort Fan, a beloved companion of the Yongjing emperor. Fan was gentle and artistic, a favorite of the emperor's for her musical talent. But another concubine, ambitious and bitter, plotted her downfall. She bribed a maid to plant one of the emperor's prized jade carvings in Fan's quarters. The theft was reported and Fan was accused of betrayal. Though innocent, Fan was demoted and imprisoned. The scheming rival rose to take her place until, years later, her own treachery was exposed and she too was banished. Stories like this unfolded again and again in the Forbidden City. Every gesture, every glance, every word could be a weapon or a trap. Even something as small as showing too much joy at another's misfortune could draw dangerous attention. And sometimes a concubine didn't need enemies, her own body could betray her. Bearing a son was the surest path to security. But if a woman miscarried or gave birth to daughters only, she might be cast aside. The tragic story of consort Rong illustrates this harsh truth. After 3 miscarriages, Rong finally bore a sickly son who died within months. Devastated and blamed for her failure, she fell from grace. The emperor, once so devoted, no longer visited her. She spent her final years wandering the palace gardens alone, haunted by what might have been. Such was the cruelty of the system. A woman's entire fate could rest on biology and chance, and even success could breed jealousy and new dangers. Now, you may wonder, did any concubines escape this poisonous game? Some did by turning inward. They embraced art, poetry, and music as a refuge. One such figure was concubine Qi, who we met earlier. Though she never became a favorite, she survived 48 years in the palace, leaving behind a collection of melancholic poems that echo across the centuries. Others, like Empress Dowager Xiaozhuang, mastered the art of political survival, navigating shifting alliances with brilliance and care. But for most, life in the harem was a constant balancing act between ambition and caution, hope and fear. And behind every embroidered robe, every painted smile, there often lurked a heart weighed down by loneliness, envy, and exhaustion. As we close this chapter, I invite you to reflect. What would it be like to live in a world where every other woman around you is both a potential ally and a potential executioner? Where your own worth was reduced to fleeting beauty and the ability to produce a son? For the women of the Forbidden City, this was not a choice. It was their only reality. In our next part, we'll delve into the lives of those concubines who endured in obscurity, who never rose to favor, but still left behind quiet legacies of resilience. Because not all stories in the palace were about power and intrigue. Some were about survival in the shadows and the quiet dignity of women who refused to be broken. Welcome back, dear listener. As we drift deeper into the heart of the Forbidden City, I invite you to imagine the palace at night, its sprawling courtyards silent, its grand halls empty. But behind the walls of the 6 inner palaces, life continues. Thousands of women, wives, concubines, maids move through their days and nights with little hope of change. Tonight, we turn our gaze toward those forgotten women of the harem. Not the famous favorites. Not the power players, but the countless concubines who entered the palace full of hope only to spend their lives in quiet obscurity. Their stories are rarely told, but they too deserve to be remembered. Imagine you are a teenage girl newly arrived at the Forbidden City. You are one of hundreds of young concubines selected during the latest Imperial choosing. Your family, thrilled by the honor, has sent you off with high hopes. Perhaps they even imagine you might become the mother of a future emperor. But when you arrive, reality sinks in. You are not alone. There are thousands of other women here, each vying for the emperor's attention, each hoping to rise through the ranks. The odds are staggering. Records from the Qing dynasty suggest that during the height of the empire, there were as many as 20,000 concubines in the Forbidden City. The emperor could only spend so many nights with so many women. For most, the opportunity to catch his eye would never come. Some were summoned once or twice if they were lucky. Many were never summoned at all. Instead, they lived out their lives in the shadowed wings of the palace, performing endless rituals, studying court etiquette, and enduring the monotony of palace life. These women, trapped in gilded cages, were often called the silent flowers of the harem, forever blooming behind closed walls, unseen. Consider the story of concubine Shi, a minor consort during the reign of the Tongji Emperor in the late Qing dynasty. She was no ordinary young woman. Born to a scholar's family, she was a gifted poet and musician. When she entered the palace at age 15, she was full of hope. Her talents quickly caught the attention of her tutors, and for a brief moment she believed she might have a future. She even inspired the young emperor to write a few admiring poems. But after a single official presentation, she was never summoned again. Why? No one knows. Perhaps a more powerful faction blocked her rise. Perhaps the emperor's interest simply waned. For the next 48 years, she remained within the walls of the Forbidden City. She became known among the other minor consorts for her sad songs and quiet demeanor. Each year, as new, younger women arrived at court, she watched the cycle repeat, girls entering full of hope only to fade into the same quiet corners. In her later years, she composed a haunting poem that survives today. Spring flowers, autumn moon. How many seasons passed me by, locked in secluded halls. A caged bird longs to spread its wings, to sing a song of sorrow. Such poignant words speak for thousands of concubines whose lives were marked by loneliness, longing, and resignation. Life for these women followed a predictable, stifling rhythm. Each day began early with elaborate grooming rituals and attendance at court ceremonies. Meals were taken in silence under the watchful eyes of eunuchs and senior consorts. There were lessons, calligraphy, poetry, music, but often these were meant less to enrich the mind and more to preserve the proper image of imperial decorum. Leisure time was rare. And even during those moments, friendships were fragile. In a world where every woman could be a rival, trust was dangerous. More often, concubines kept to themselves, embroidering, practicing music, or simply staring out at the palace gardens, longing for a glimpse of freedom. The cold palace was the ultimate fate that many feared. This term referred to the sections of the Forbidden City where fallen or forgotten concubines were housed. There, in neglected chambers, women lived out their days with little contact with the court or the outside world. Some faded into madness. Others accepted their lot with quiet dignity. Occasionally, their voices broke through. In 2006, archaeologists discovered a cache of 36 letters written by a Ming dynasty concubine named Dawn, who had been exiled to the cold palace. Written on delicate silk and hidden for centuries, Dawn's letters overflow with longing for her family and home. In one heartbreaking passage, she wrote to her brother, "Worthy younger brother, please send me a jar of pickles. Life in the palace is so miserable. There are many things I wish to say, but there is no point in saying them aloud." Her words echoed the profound isolation that so many women endured. Even those who once held favor were not safe from this fate. Consort Rong, whom we met in the last chapter, spent her final years wandering alone in the palace gardens after losing her only son. Similarly, Consort Wu Rong, a talented poet and painter from the 12th century Song dynasty, was falsely accused of sorcery and imprisoned for decades. When finally released, Wu chose not to return to court. Instead, she lived out her days as a hermit, scarred by her years of captivity. In one of her final poems, she wrote, "The memory seems like a spring dream that will not stay. That glittering world held all me fleeting joys. In the end, this floating life is nothing but void. Why were so many women left to fade away? Because in the harem, a woman's worth was measured by two things, her beauty and her ability to bear sons. Once you faded or fortune turned, a concubine became expendable. Unlike a wife in the outside world, she could not marry again. She could not leave the palace. She was a prisoner for life unless a new emperor granted her freedom, which was rare. Even bearing a son was no guarantee of lasting security. If palace politics shifted, even favored mothers could be cast aside. The truth was brutal. In the palace, all women were temporary. And yet, amid the loneliness and despair, many concubines found ways to endure. Some embraced the arts, leaving behind beautiful poems and paintings that still move us today. Others became mentors to younger women, passing down what wisdom they could. And some, like concubine Chi, chose to maintain their dignity even as the seasons passed them by. Their resilience reminds us that even in the darkest corners of history, the human spirit can endure. As we prepare to close this chapter, consider this. For every empress or famous consort whose name graces the history books, there were hundreds, thousands of other women whose lives unfolded in silence. They were the unseen tapestry of the Forbidden City, the voices behind the embroidered screens, the hearts behind the painted smiles. Their lives may have been forgotten by official histories, but their struggles, their yearnings, and their quiet strength deserve to be remembered. In our next part, we will explore how these themes played out during the fall of the Ming Dynasty, when the palace walls themselves could not protect the concubines from the chaos of a collapsing empire. Welcome back, dear listener. So far, we have wandered through the quiet shadows of the Forbidden City, through the lives of forgotten concubines who endured years of loneliness and longing behind vermilion walls. But sometimes even those towering walls could not protect them. There were moments in history when the imperial harem was thrust violently into the center of the empire's storms. Moments when the careful order of palace life collapsed and the concubines, once cloistered and controlled, became pawns, victims, or even targets in the brutal game of dynastic change. Tonight, we travel back to one of those moments. The final, tragic days of the Ming Dynasty. It was the spring of 1644. For nearly 3 centuries, the Ming emperors had ruled China. But now their world was crumbling. Inside the Forbidden City, rumors spread like wildfire. Rebel armies were approaching Beijing. The Emperor Chongzhen was a deeply troubled man. Paranoid and erratic, he spent his final weeks in a spiral of fear and rage. As the capital's defenses collapsed, Chongzhen withdrew into the palace, surrounded by a shrinking circle of officials, concubines, and eunuchs. For the women of the harem, many of them young, many from noble families, terror mounted with each passing day. They had nowhere to run. The city gates were closing. The palace was under siege. And outside, rebel forces led by Li Zicheng prepared to storm the heart of the empire. Faced with inevitable defeat, the emperor's mind turned to a dark solution. He could not allow his concubines and daughters to fall into enemy hands. To be captured by rebels was a fate worse than death. And so, in an act of desperation, he ordered a mass suicide of the imperial harem. Historical records describe that night in haunting detail. The concubines, dressed in their finest robes and jewelry, were gathered in the palace chambers. Some wept. Some prayed. Others sat in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what was about to happen. Silver cups of poisoned wine were prepared. Those who refused to drink were killed by palace eunuchs acting under imperial orders. One by one, the women, many still teenagers, took their final sits. When dawn broke over the Forbidden City, the chambers were filled with the lifeless bodies of hundreds of concubines and palace women. The emperor himself soon followed, hanging himself on a tree outside the palace grounds. With that, the Ming Dynasty ended, not with a grand battle, but with a cascade of death behind the red walls. It is hard to imagine a more senseless tragedy. These women had no say in the emperor's wars, no say in the politics of the court. And yet, they paid with their lives, sacrificed to imperial pride and paranoia. One moment, they were concubines. The next, they were pawns in the bloody collapse of a dynasty. Some historians believe that as many as 300 concubines perished that night. Others suggest the number may have been even higher, as palace records were destroyed in the chaos. Their names, if they were ever recorded, have long since been lost. All that remains is the faint echo of their final moments. The glimmer of silk, the bitter taste of poison, the cold dawn of an empire's end. This was not the only time the women of the harem were caught in the crossfire of history. Consider the transition from the Ming to the Qing dynasty that followed. When the Manchu armies seized Beijing, they entered a forbidden city filled with both Ming loyalists and surviving members of the Imperial harem. The fate of these women varied. Some were taken as trophies, distributed to Manchu officers, or forced into new marriages. Others were absorbed into the Qing imperial harem, but always under suspicion, their loyalty questioned. Many, unwilling to submit to the conquerors, chose suicide instead. In one account, a group of former Ming concubines gathered in a palace garden and leapt together into an ornamental lake, choosing death over dishonor. Even those who survived faced a lifetime of isolation. They were forbidden to remarry, watched closely, and used as symbols of the Qing conquest. Imagine spending decades under such scrutiny, living in the same palace where your world had once thrived, now a silent witness to its downfall. The dangers for concubines during dynastic change were not limited to conquest. Even in times of imperial transition within a single dynasty, the death of an emperor often spelled doom for many palace women. The new ruler, seeking to consolidate power, might purge the old harem to eliminate potential threats or rival factions. And those concubines who had aligned themselves too closely with a previous emperor's favorites could find themselves imprisoned, exiled, or worse. One chilling example comes from the early Qing dynasty. When the Xuanji emperor died young, his mother, the Empress Dowager, purged the harem of women she considered politically dangerous. Several concubines who had once enjoyed Xuanji's favor were forced to become Buddhist nuns, cut off from their children and the court. Others were simply disappeared, their fate unrecorded, their names erased from official history. Why did these patterns repeat, dynasty after dynasty? Because in imperial China, the harem was not just a collection of women, it was a political institution. Every concubine represented a family, a faction, a potential alliance, or a threat. And when power changed hands, those symbols of the old order had to be controlled or eliminated. It was a brutal calculus. Better to sacrifice 100 women than risk one becoming a rallying point for rebellion. And so, generation after generation, concubines lived with the constant knowledge that their lives were bound to the rise and fall of emperors. What lessons can we take from these dark chapters? Perhaps this: even amid the grandeur of the Forbidden City, life for the palace women was never secure. They were trapped not only by walls but by the tides of history beyond their control. A favored concubine one year could become a prisoner or a corpse the next. A dynasty that had lasted for centuries could crumble overnight, taking thousands of lives with it. And for the women of the harem, there was no escape, no safe harbor. Their stories remind us that behind the glittering facade of imperial China lay a world of fear, uncertainty, and profound human cost. As we prepare to leave this chapter, let us remember the concubines who perished during the fall of the Ming, the survivors who endured in silence through the rise of the Qing, and the countless women whose lives were shaped to ruin by forces far beyond their own choosing. In our next part, we will explore the psychological toll of life inside the Forbidden City, the loneliness, the rivalries, and the small acts of resistance that allowed some women to reclaim a measure of agency in a world designed to strip it away. Welcome back, dear listener. So far, we've explored the grand sweep of history, the fall of dynasties, the brutal politics of the palace. But tonight, we'll shift our focus inward into the minds and hearts of the women who lived inside the Forbidden City. Because beyond the political dangers, beyond the public humiliations, life as an imperial concubine took an equally devastating psychological toll. Loneliness, rivalry, yearning, fear, boredom. These were constant companions woven into the fabric of daily life behind the red walls. Let's pull back the curtain on that quieter, but no less tragic, struggle. To begin, we must understand one simple truth. Most of the thousands of concubines in the palace would never truly know the emperor. They might see him once, perhaps at a formal presentation. A handful would be summoned to his chambers briefly. But for the vast majority, the emperor remained a distant figure, a godlike presence glimpsed only at ceremonies or festivals. Their lives were spent in waiting. Waiting to be noticed. Waiting to be chosen. Waiting for a summons that, in many cases, would never come. Imagine living in such a state of permanent suspended hope. Each morning, a concubine would wake and prepare herself. Hairstyled, silks chosen, scents applied, and then, nothing. Days passed in a repetitive cycle of rituals, needlework, and stifling etiquette. Weeks became months. Months became years. For many women, the palace became a prison of time itself. In this vacuum of purpose, the women turned inward. Some immersed themselves in the arts, poetry, music, painting, seeking meaning where they could. Others clung to the routines of palace life, finding comfort in the rituals. But far too many succumbed to melancholy and despair. There was even a recognized condition for this, siang si bing, homesickness illness. Young concubines, torn from their families and familiar worlds, often fell ill in the early months, unable to eat, sleep, or smile. The isolation was profound. Letters to family were censored, rare, or forbidden. Visits from relatives were nearly impossible. Friendships within the harem were fragile, shadowed always by competition. You might trust a fellow concubine one day only to find her spreading rumors about you the next. True companionship was a dangerous luxury. The climate of rivalry further poisoned the palace atmosphere. With so many women vying for so few opportunities to advance, the harem became a hotbed of jealousy, intrigue, and betrayal. Gossip was a powerful weapon. So was subtle sabotage, misplacing a rival's gown before a ceremony, tampering with her cosmetics, or even slipping harmful herbs into her food. In extreme cases, poison and black magic were rumored to be used. The stakes were life and death. To gain the emperor's favor meant not only luxury but protection. To lose that favor, or worse, to be framed for a crime, could mean exile or execution. Thus, many concubines hardened themselves, burying compassion beneath calculation. Others withdrew, becoming ghosts within the palace, living quietly in the corners of the forbidden city, unseen and forgotten. But even in this oppressive world, some women found ways to resist, subtly, bravely. Consider the story of concubine Qi during the reign of the Qianlong emperor. Born to a poor family, Qi rose quickly through the ranks, thanks to her talent in music and poetry. But when she failed to bear the emperor's son, her rivals closed in. Rumors were spread. Accusations flew. In response, she chose an unusual path. Rather than fight for favor, she embraced spiritual life within the palace, studying Buddhist texts and teaching the other women meditation. She transformed her quarters into a place of quiet reflection where concubines of all ranks could come to find a measure of peace. Though she never regained her former status, Qi's influence endured. Years later, when a new empress sought to restore order and dignity to the harem, she called upon Qi to serve as a mentor to the younger women. In a place designed to strip women of agency, Qi carved out a space where kindness and wisdom still mattered. There are other such stories, small acts of defiance, quiet courage. A concubine who secretly taught literacy to the palace maids. A favored woman who used her influence to protect vulnerable newcomers from abuse. Groups of concubines who formed poetry societies, finding solidarity and self-expression through verse. These were not grand rebellions. But in a world where women were treated as ornaments and pawns, such acts were revolutionary. They were ways of asserting, I am more than my rank. I am more than my woe. I am a person. I think. I feel. I endure. And yet, for every such story of resilience, there were dozens of quiet tragedies. Women who faded into the background. Women who lost themselves to despair, madness, or illness. In the cold palace, a term for the quarters where disfavored concubines were sent to live out their days in isolation, many spent decades in obscurity. Some died with no record of their passing, no family present, no name preserved. Others left behind only fragments, a torn poem, a whispered memory in an old courtier's diary. These ghosts of the harem remind us that beneath the silks and jewels were real women, with hopes, dreams, and sorrows all their own. As we reflect on the psychological toll of life in the Forbidden City, let us remember. For most concubines, the greatest battle was not with rivals or emperors. It was the daily struggle to retain their sense of self, to hold onto their humanity in a system designed to erase it. Some succeeded against all odds. Many did not. Their stories, fragile, fragmented, still whisper to us across the centuries. See me, remember me, understand what I endured. In our next part, we will explore one final layer of this complex world. The price of power for those few concubines who did rise to the heights of the imperial hierarchy. Because even at the pinnacle of the harem, danger still lurked. And the higher you climbed, the farther you had to fall. Welcome back, dear listener. Tonight, we turn our gaze upward toward the highest ranks of the imperial harem. Because as treacherous as life was for the lower concubines, it was not necessarily easier for those who rose to the top. In fact, the higher a concubine climbed, the more dangerous the game became. More eyes watched. More rivals plotted. More power players sought to use or destroy you. To be a favored consort or empress was to walk a narrow, shifting path one misstep away from ruin. Let us explore what it truly meant to hold such power and what it could cost. First, understand this. A concubine's journey to the pinnacle of the harem often began with a single stroke of luck, the emperor's favor. Perhaps it was her beauty, perhaps her wit, perhaps some indefinable charm that caught his eye. Suddenly, a woman who had spent months or years in obscurity might find herself summoned again and again to the emperor's chambers. Gifts followed: silks, jewels, rarities. With time and continued favor, she might be promoted. From noble lady, to imperial concubine, to consort, to imperial noble consort, and for a rare few even to empress. But each promotion was a double-edged sword. It brought prestige and privilege but also painted a target on her back. Every rival in the harem now watched her with envy and malice. Consider the story of Consort Chunwei, a famed consort of the Qianlong Emperor. Born into a noble Manchu family, she was selected for the palace at 13. The emperor was immediately taken with her intelligence, musical talent, and easy conversation. For years, she was his closest companion, drafting letters, advising him privately, and accompanying him on imperial tours. Her father and brothers were richly rewarded. Her family rose alongside her. But as always, the tides of fortune turned. By her early 30s, Chunwei's youthful beauty began to fade. New teenage concubines entered the palace, eager to seduce the emperor. Worse, her growing influence had bred resentment not just among her fellow consorts but among court officials who saw her family as a threat. Whispers began to swirl that she had grown arrogant, that she interfered in affairs of state, that she was practicing black magic to curse her rivals. A single accusation, one maid's testimony under torture, sealed her fate. Once the emperor's cherished companion, Chunwei was arrested, beaten, and banished to a remote fortress. She died alone, her family purged, her name disgraced. Such was the peril of rising too high. And yet, despite these dangers, many women risked everything to climb the harem hierarchy. Why? Because at the apex, life could be extraordinary. The empress ruled the inner court with vast authority. Imperial noble consorts wielded influence over palace rituals and spending. Favored consorts could shape court fashion, art, and even the emperor's decisions. For a woman born into a patriarchal world, the harem paradoxically offered one of the few routes to real power. But that power was conditional. It existed only so long as the emperor's love endured and so long as the political winds remained favorable. A single word from the emperor or a single successful plot could erase years of triumph in an instant. One of the most tragic examples is that of imperial noble consort Yijin, beloved of the Xianfeng emperor. For years, she was his emotional anchor, his closest companion during turbulent times. Paintings of her show a woman with a subtle, knowing smile, radiant with quiet confidence. But after the emperor's death, Yijin found herself at the mercy of new political forces. Without an heir and without powerful allies, she was swiftly dismissed, forced into a distant Buddhist nunnery. From commanding one of the grandest residences in the Forbidden City, she was reduced to a life of poverty and isolation. No title, no influence, no protection. Her final years were spent in obscurity, her memory nearly lost to history. Such was the fragility of power in the harem. Yet, not all women at the top met such ends. Some managed to navigate the palace's shifting alliances with skill and grace, preserving their positions for decades. Consider Empress Xiaozhuang, mother of the Xuanji Emperor. She not only survived as Empress Dowager, she became the de facto ruler of the empire, guiding her young son and later her grandson. Through intelligence, diplomacy, and restraint, she turned the inner court into her sphere of influence, outlasting rival factions and earning deep respect. But her story was the exception, not the rule. For most high-ranking concubines, the climb to the top was followed, inevitably, by a sharp and painful fall. The constant fear of such a fall exacted a brutal psychological toll. Even in her moment of greatest triumph, a concubine knew. The emperor might tire of her tomorrow. A jealous rival might whisper a lie that caught his ear. A new beauty might eclipse her in an instant. To maintain her position, she had to live in perpetual vigilance, monitoring court alliances, buying the loyalty of eunuchs and servants, managing her public image with exquisite care. It was a life of ceaseless calculation. Every word, every glance, every gesture mattered. One mistake could be fatal. And beyond politics lay the deepest vulnerability of all: childbirth. For even the most powerful concubine, the surest path to permanent status was to bear a healthy son. But as we've seen, childbirth was dangerous and the pressure immense. A failed pregnancy could trigger a fall from grace. A daughter rather than a son might mean years of disappointment and marginalization. Even a successful birth was no guarantee. The child might die young. The child might be passed over for succession. The mother might be blamed for any perceived misfortune. Thus, motherhood itself became a minefield. As we reflect on these stories, it's clear. The price of power in the imperial harem was enormous. For the women who rose to its highest ranks, the rewards could be dazzling. But the dangers, betrayal, exile, disgrace, death were ever present. In many ways, the most tragic figures of all were not the forgotten low-ranking concubines, but the once favored women who fell from unimaginable heights. Because they knew what they had lost. They remembered the luxury, the influence, the emperor's gaze, and then had to live without them, haunted by the echoes of their former glory. As we prepare for our next part, we will look beyond individual stories into the larger political uses of concubinage. How the imperial harem served the broader goals of diplomacy, statecraft, and empire. Because in truth, even the highest-ranked concubines were often pawns in a much greater game. Welcome back, dear listener. Tonight, we step back from the personal dramas of individual concubines to explore a larger truth. The imperial harem was not just about love, lust, or family. It was an institution deeply intertwined with the machinery of empire. The women of the harem were not merely companions or mothers of heirs. They were also pawns, political tools used to further the ambitions of powerful clans, solidify alliances, and project imperial prestige. Let us explore how the Forbidden City's hidden chambers echoed not only with whispered romances, but with the pulse of empire-building strategy. From the earliest dynasties, emperors understood that their marriages and concubines could serve far-reaching political purposes. At its most basic, this was a way to manage the powerful clans of the realm. When an emperor took daughters from influential families into the palace, it created personal ties of loyalty, a network of influence within the inner court, leverage over potential rivals. In effect, the harem became a living map of the empire's power structure. A wise emperor used his bedchamber not only to seek pleasure but to bind the loyalty of key families. Consider the practice of marriage alliances with border tribes and foreign kingdoms. Throughout Chinese history, emperors often received princesses and noblewomen from neighboring states as diplomatic brides. This was particularly common with the Mongols, the Manchus, the Tibetans, the Uyghurs, various Central Asian kingdoms. Sometimes these women were honored as empresses or high-ranking consorts. Other times they were added to the ranks of concubines, hostages cloaked in silks, their presence a symbol of peace, submission, or alliance. One famous example is the story of the fragrant concubine, Xiang Fei. In the 18th century, during the reign of the Qianlong Emperor, the Qing court sought to stabilize its rule over the newly conquered region of Xinjiang. The local Muslim ruler offered his beautiful daughter, a woman famed for her natural fragrance, as a concubine for the emperor. Xiang Fei's arrival in Beijing was a calculated move. It bound her family to the Qin throne. It helped pacify Xinjiang. It gave the emperor a token of victory and legitimacy. But for Xiang Fei herself, the experience was one of exile and profound sorrow. Torn from her homeland, surrounded by strangers, she reportedly resisted assimilation and remained emotionally distant from the emperor. Her story, part myth, part history, became a poignant symbol of the costs borne by women caught in the cross-currents of imperial politics. Beyond foreign diplomacy, the harem also played a key role in domestic power struggles. By selecting concubines from rival clans, an emperor could manipulate the balance of power within his court, elevating certain families while sidelining others, playing factions against each other, using affection as leverage to secure loyalty or suppress dissent. Sometimes even the mere rumor that a powerful official's daughter might enter the palace was enough to shift the entire political landscape. For ambitious families, having a daughter in the harem was not merely a matter of prestige, it was a potential path to enormous influence. A son born to a favored concubine could alter the succession. An empress or high-ranking consort could shape imperial policy behind the scenes. Thus, the competition to place daughters in the palace was fierce and often ruthless. Of course, this made the lives of individual concubines even more precarious. Many young women entered the Forbidden City as representatives of their families' ambitions, burdened with the expectation of advancing the clan's interests. Failure to win favor, or worse, to fall into disgrace, could bring shame upon their entire lineage. Success, meanwhile, meant navigating an impossible tension. Pleasing the emperor, promoting their family's goals, avoiding the suspicion of being too political or manipulative. It was a high-stakes balancing act few managed to master. Consider the tragic example of consortium, favored concubine of the Guangxu emperor in the late Qing dynasty. Her family's rising influence through her position provoked the wrath of the powerful Empress Dowager Cixi. During a coup attempt by reformist factions aligned with consortium's brother, the young woman was caught in the crossfire. Despite her personal innocence, she was condemned as a political liability. In the final days before the fall of Beijing to foreign forces in 1900, she was thrown into a palace well on Cixi's orders, drowned to ensure no rival faction could claim her as a symbol. A brutal end for a woman who had once basked in the glow of imperial favor, her fate sealed not by love or failure, but by the tides of court politics. As we can see, no matter how romanticized the idea of the imperial harem became in later storytelling, its true function was always deeply political. It served the management of elite families, the projection of imperial power, the crafting of dynastic alliances, the control of foreign relations, the manipulation of court factions. At its heart, the harem was a political institution first and a romantic one second. And the women within it paid the price for that reality, often with their lives. Perhaps most chilling was the fate of concubines during dynastic transitions. When one regime fell and another rose, the incoming rulers often viewed the former emperor's harem as a dangerous legacy, potential symbols of resistance, possible bearers of rival heirs, embodiments of the old order's legitimacy. In many cases, this led to mass purges of palace women. During the fall of the Ming dynasty, hundreds of concubines were forced to commit suicide to avoid capture by rebel forces. Under the early Qing, Ming concubines were scrutinized and sometimes killed or forced into humiliating servitude. During other periods, concubines were exiled to cold palaces or Buddhist nuns' quarters erased from history. In these brutal moments, the harem's political role was laid bare. The women of the palace were not seen as individuals, but as assets to be liquidated or neutralized in the great game of dynastic survival. And yet, despite this ruthlessness, some concubines managed to turn political forces to their own advantage. Through careful alliances, cultural patronage, and sheer intelligence, a few women shaped the course of Chinese history from behind the silk screens. We will explore their stories in our next part, tales of defiance, brilliance, and unexpected agency. Because while the harem was designed to control women, it could not entirely extinguish their will. Some concubines became not victims, but hidden architects of empire. Welcome back, dear listener. As we near the end of this long and winding journey through the world of the imperial harem, it is time to illuminate a more surprising chapter of the story. While the harem was built to contain and control women, to reduce them to adornments or pawns in imperial politics, not every concubine accepted her fate passively. Across centuries and dynasties, there were extraordinary women who used their intelligence, artistry, courage, and determination to shape the course of Chinese history. They became not just survivors, but hidden architects of empire. Let us honor them now. One of the most famous examples is Empress Wu Zetian. Born into a well-off family during the Tang dynasty, Wu Zetian entered the palace as a concubine of Emperor Taizong. After his death, she entered a Buddhist nunnery only to be recalled to court by the next emperor Gaozong, who became utterly besotted with her. Over time, Wu Zetian rose from concubine to empress, then, through a series of shrewd maneuvers and ruthless purges, to empress regnant, the only woman in Chinese history to rule in her own name. Under her reign, she strengthened the civil service exam system, promoted talented officials of humble origin, expanded the empire's borders, championed Buddhist culture and the arts. Wu Zetian's path was controversial, marked by bloodshed and political manipulation, but her impact on Chinese governance was undeniable. And it all began in the so-called powerless confines of the harem. Another remarkable woman was Empress Dowager Cixi, a concubine of the Xianfeng Emperor during the Qing dynasty. She entered the Forbidden City at 16, selected during a national beauty search. Cixi's rise to power began when she bore the emperor's son, the future Tongji Emperor. After Xianfeng's death, Cixi outmaneuvered her rivals, seizing the regency for her young son and then later for her nephew, the Guangxu Emperor. For nearly half a century, Cixi ruled China from behind a screen, mastering the art of court politics and diplomacy. Under her leadership, the Qing court navigated the complex challenges of the late 19th century. Modernization efforts were cautiously embraced. Foreign encroachments were resisted through a combination of diplomacy and force. Cixi was vilified in many Western accounts, but recent scholarship has revealed a more nuanced portrait of a shrewd, capable ruler who did much to stabilize a crumbling dynasty. Again, her journey began in the very place where women were expected to remain voiceless and powerless. Beyond the empresses and regents, there were also countless concubines who left their mark through art, literature, and culture. Cut off from the outside world, many cultivated the arts as a means of self-expression and subtle resistance. Consider Consort Ban, a concubine of the Han Emperor Qing. Renowned for her intellect and literary talent, Consort Ban declined the emperor's invitation to join him in a royal hunt, citing the need to remain modest and virtuous. Her poems and essays became famous throughout the empire. She used her writings to subtly critique court excesses and preserve her dignity in a hostile environment. Even after falling out of favor, Consort Ban was respected as a scholar, and her legacy endured long after her death. Similarly, the Ming Dynasty concubine Dong Xiaowan became a celebrated poet and painter. Born into a courtesan family, she entered the imperial court under the patronage of a high-ranking official. Though her life was marred by tragedy and political turmoil, her art left a lasting impression. Dong's paintings captured the emotional landscape of palace life, the loneliness, the longing, the quiet despair. Her poems, circulated secretly among women of the court, offered a rare and authentic voice from within the forbidden city. In this way, even those concubines who could not influence state affairs directly still contributed to the cultural fabric of their times, ensuring that their inner lives were not entirely erased. And what of the unnamed? For every Wu Zetian or Cixi, there were countless other concubines who found small ways to resist and reclaim their humanity. Through mentoring younger women in the harem, by preserving traditional crafts and artistic practices, by protecting vulnerable servants and maids, by finding fleeting moments of joy and friendship within the palace walls. These quiet acts of courage and compassion matter deeply. They speak to the indomitable human spirit, the refusal to be entirely defined or defeated by oppressive systems. In remembering the concubines of the imperial harem, it is vital that we honor both their suffering and their strength. They were not mere victims or romantic ornaments. They were mothers and daughters, writers and artists, politicians and reformers, survivors and rebels. They shaped dynasties, influenced emperors, and left behind legacies that ripple through history. Even the most forgotten among them, those whose names were lost to time, contributed to the great and tragic tapestry of the Forbidden City. Their resilience offers us timeless lessons about the capacity of the human heart to endure, adapt, and sometimes even triumph in the face of unimaginable constraints. And so, dear listener, as we draw this journey to a close, let us reflect one final time. Behind the towering red walls of the Forbidden City lived real women. They dreamed, they suffered, they schemed, they loved. They were trapped in a gilded cage, yes, but within that cage, many found ways to sing, to fight, and to live with dignity. May their stories inspire us to cherish the freedoms we now enjoy and to remember that even in the darkest of places, light can still shine through. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the hidden world of the Imperial concubines. If you found this series meaningful, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with others who might value these stories. Until next time, sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with wisdom and compassion.